The Irish planning system is broken, it's not fit for purpose, it will not deliver on the housing that we need, and a recent report has just confirmed that. The planning system is capping the number of homes that can be built. Some locations are even reducing their targets. The amount of zoned land has been reduced to the tune of 100,000 units. How does that statement even make sense in the middle of a housing crisis? House numbers are being capped and the amount of available zoned land is being reduced to a tune of 100,000 units. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you will have heard me place a lot of the blame of the housing crisis on our planning system. If this is your first time watching, I put out loads of property related videos, so make sure to subscribe. There are lots of commentators out there that will try to take blame away from the planning system and place blame of the housing crisis onto REITs, funds and developers. The same commentators will also make statements like that we've got a lot of units already have been granted planning permission and we have lots of zoned land. But it's not as simple as that, and many people within the industry, like me, will place a lot of the blame of the housing crisis on our planning system. And this week, Savills produced a report highlighting the issues within our planning system and how the planning system is set up to under-deliver on housing. The report is titled The Residential Supply Study: How the Cutting of Land is Impacting the Housing Market. The opening line of the report reads, "Land is to a developer akin to wood is a carpenter. It is an essential raw material which everything else flows." The report states in its opening paragraph that approximately 100,000 units have been lost between past development plans and current development plans for the Greater Dublin Area. The root cause for so many units being lost in the Greater Dublin Area is due to the National Planning Framework, which is an unrealistic ideology that development and population growth can happen evenly throughout the country. There has been countless similar plans over the last 20 years or more that have failed miserably, and they've failed miserably because of this failed ideology or this unrealistic ideology that growth can happen evenly throughout a country. Ireland is too small to have more than one major city. Dublin itself is a small city from an international point of view. Ireland hasn't got the scope to have 3 or 4 major cities, and our planning system has to start to reflect that. I'm not just saying this because I'm from Dublin. It's backed up from nearly every IDA report and Enterprise Ireland report that international companies want to locate in Dublin, and so does the majority of the workforce. And this is evident by high property prices and high rents. Demand is highest in Dublin, and our planning system needs to start reflecting that. And the Savills report backs this up, that it is a fundamentally flawed approach in terms of equal growth throughout the country, as it caps Dublin's growth between now and 2040 at 20 to 25%, where the rest of the country can grow between 50 and 60% over the same period. And this takes no account of where demand is at its highest, where people want to live or work, or also where it's the most sustainable for us to develop. This approach means that the Greater Dublin Area will be undersupplied for the next 20 years. The report goes on to state that it is now required that 40% of development takes place on greenfield sites, i.e. sites that have already been developed on within urban areas. People who are familiar with development will understand that these are the most expensive sites to develop for a whole host of reasons, and the report illustrates this quite clearly. There are greater planning objections because there's more people in the area to object. Generally, ownership and title issues can come about in city centres because there's multiple titles all around a site. Scalability can be a concern because it's hard to find big sites within city centres. There's also demolishment costs, and site clearances costs can add up to hundreds of thousands to nearly $1 million in the cost of construction. You also have issues when you're building on old cities. You can end up finding a Viking bone or a Viking village that could hold up development for years, even if you're allowed to develop on it at any stage in the future. You also might have to deal with site contamination. If there are chemicals in the ground, this generally is quite common with industrial sites, and you may have to move all the soil outside of Ireland or ship it outside of Ireland to be treated, which is very costly. You may have density requirements in many city centres. Planning requirements may require you to do different uses within the site, and therefore this adds to complications in terms of what you can build and design. You will also have work hour restrictions. Site accessibility might be an issue in terms of bringing in large machinery, and there will also be a planning bias to piecemeal development because councils want large developments to happen on some key sites, and this may not always be possible if the developer doesn't own all the land. There are other complications when you are developing out brownfield sites, but you get my point. These sites are the hardest ones to develop and generally are the last to be redeveloped because they're extremely expensive to develop and deliver new housing. And generally speaking, when the housing is developed on these sites, they tend to be at the very high end. Savills also highlight, as a result of the National Planning Framework, councils are restricted in the amount of land that they can make available for residential housing. This issue is also compounded as a large amount of the land that is earmarked for residential development is not currently serviced, i.e. there's no roads or water, etc. going to this land. And Savills highlight that in South County Dublin, nearly 50% of the land that is marked for development is not currently serviced. So you can technically get planning permission for your development, but you won't be able to build because the site isn't serviced. The report also highlights something that I've spoken about in countless videos in regards to the vacant site levy and zoned residential tax, using the same phrasing that I have used as well in regards to carrot and not the stick. And if we really want to solve the housing crisis, we need to use the carrot and not the stick. By adding this, or by using the stick and adding additional costs or adding additional taxes, all we're really doing is passing that on to the end buyer. Something that everyone seems to have realised with the recent announcement of the concrete block levy, that that cost or that levy will be passed down to the end user, i.e. the buyer. And the same is true with the vacant site levy. The cost of that will be passed down to the end user. And the report also highlights the fact that the councils have been inept in terms of making or collecting the vacant site levy. If the government really want to solve the issue of vacant brownfield sites, they should be offering tax incentives like they did in the 80s, 90s and early 2000s. But they're afraid of the negative PR that will stem from offering developers or landlords tax incentives to go off and develop. In real estate development, the carrot has always worked better than the stick, and the same will be true right now. It's the same all over the world. The carrot always produces more development if that's what you're looking for. The report also highlights some of the main issues that developers face in terms of affordability, economic markets, labour costs increasing and issues with labour supply, interest rates increasing, as well as material costs increasing as well. The report suggests that the last thing we need in terms of helping to deliver new houses is actually reducing the amount of land that's available and adding even more planning uncertainty to the process. The report suggests that councils should have targets for planning approvals rather than caps, because targets are a far better benchmark. This is something I mentioned perhaps a year ago because I saw that councils in Australia were having far greater and better results in terms of affordability when the council had a target for planning approvals rather than a cap. If the planning framework is not fixed, no targets within the housing for all will be met, and the Greater Dublin Area will be undersupplied for the next 20 years. I hope you liked this video, got some information from this video. Perhaps you might consider subscribing. I will link the full report below. I have no connections with Savills whatsoever, but the report highlights many of the things that I've been talking about for the last 2 years. As always, thanks for watching.